Dying, that was the word for Daniel Crane's cough, and his brother Elias had 3 days before a stranger's coin changed his life forever. The lamp in the back room of the doctor's house in Cedar Hollow, Montana Territory, burned low and yellow, throwing shadows across a 16-year-old boy's face, gone the color of old wax. Each breath dragged up out of him like water hauled from a dry well. Elias Crane sat on the edge of that narrow bed, with his hat crushed between 2 fists that had broken more bronchs than he could count, and still couldn't fix the one thing that mattered. 3 more days, plain as a closing door, was as long as an unpaid debt could buy. Elias had 41 cents to his name and a horse he didn't fully own. The next morning, into the Cedar Hollow mercantile walked the poorest-looking cowhand in the whole territory, a woman in a patched canvas coat and a hat gone shapeless from rain, and she set a single gold double eagle on the counter between them, and spoke 2 words that would turn out to be the truest thing anyone in that town had ever put to him. Marry me. This is Elias Crane's story, but it's every bit as much the story of the woman who dropped that coin, and I promise you this. Stay with me to the end, and you'll understand why a cowgirl the whole territory believed too poor to own a decent saddle turned out to be the answer to more than one prayer, and why a plain business bargain became the truest marriage in the whole county before it was through. There is a hidden valley in these mountains that Cedar Hollow had only ever heard of as rumor, a green fold of land behind a gate nobody in that town had passed through, and before this story ends, that gate is going to open, and everything the town believed about poor and rich, plain and secret, is going to turn itself inside out. Montana Territory, 1883. Cedar Hollow was a crossroads of maybe 400 souls, a mercantile, 2 churches, a land office, and enough gossip to fill a newspaper nobody had gotten around to starting. For 6 years the town had known a cowhand named Ada Vance, the way it knew 100 other drifting hands who rode fence and broke horses up and down the Missouri River bottom for wages. Competent, quiet, unremarkable, a woman who wore a man's canvas coat because it wore better than a dress and a saddle, who slept in bunkhouses when a ranch would have her and under the stars when it wouldn't, who took her pay in cash at month's end the same as anybody else riding for someone else's brand. What Cedar Hollow never once suspected, because Ada Vance had spent 6 careful years making sure of it, was that the hand known simply as Ada was the sole owner of the Hidden Valley outfit 2 days' ride north, 11,000 acres of the best grass and timber and water in 3 counties, a house her own father had built stone by stone, a herd running to 9,000 head in a good season, and a name on the county deed that could have bought half of Cedar Hollow twice over without troubling the bank. Her father, Amos Vance, had come into that valley with a wagon and a rifle, and less schooling than most boys his age, and built something out of raw ground through sheer bull-headed patience, the kind of work that doesn't make for exciting telling but builds things that last. When the fever took him 5 winters back, everything passed to Ada, his only child, and for the first year she ran it exactly as herself, hosting the county assessor, signing bank drafts, letting the world see plainly what she had. That went well enough until a smooth rancher from over toward Bozeman, Ezra Combs, spent the better part of a year courting her with a gentleness that had nearly won her over, right up until the night she overheard him bragging to his own brother over cards that marrying the Vance girl was the cheapest 11,000 acres a man would ever find in his whole life. She hadn't wept over Ezra Combs. She had thought instead, cold and clear the way her father used to think through a hard winter, about how a woman with no visible wealth was a woman nobody courted for the wrong reasons, and about how a hand working another rancher's fence line could watch a man's whole character with nothing at stake but her own time. So she built a second life and stepped into it deliberately, left her valley in Otis Marsh's steady hands, the foreman who'd worked for her father since before she could sit a horse, and wrote out under her own name, but none of her own history, hiring on ranch to ranch as a hand who could rope and doctor stock and mend fence. And better than most, it wasn't loneliness that drove her to it. It was arithmetic. She wanted, someday, to be wanted for the woman who could read a storm an hour before it broke, not for the acreage attached to her name, and the only honest way to find that man was to become, for a while, someone he had no earthly reason to want except herself. Elias Crane had ridden into Cedar Hollow 8 months earlier, with his kid brother riding double behind him and little else to speak of. Their parents had died of the same winter fever 3 years back in Wyoming Territory. Their small lease spread gone to the bank the season after. Every dollar either brother earned poured first into keeping food on a table and then this last hard year into keeping Daniel breathing at all. Daniel's cough had started as nothing, the kind every boy got come autumn, and by midwinter it had turned into something that rattled in his chest like loose gravel in a tin can, and left him too weak most mornings to stand without his brother's arm under his own. The doctor, a careful man named Pratt, had done what any decent physician could: fever powders, mustard plasters, long nights of watching, and had been honest too, the way a man has to be honest with a patient's family sooner or later, that the boy needed weeks more of careful nursing and medicine that cost real money, and that a doctor, with his own household to feed, could only carry so large a debt so long Elias worked. He broke horses nobody else wanted for $1 a head, mucked stalls at the livery before dawn, took whatever a proud man could stomach without it costing him the last of his dignity, and none of it added up fast enough. He was 26, lean and hard from a decade of work that never let up, with a face that gave nothing away, and a pride that had turned down 3 separate offers of straight charity from families in town who could see plainly enough what was happening in that back room. He'd promised himself every night for 3 weeks that he'd find a way, right up until the morning the doctor sat him down and made clear, as gently as the news allowed, that Monday was the last day the boy's care could go on the books unpaid. The Cedar Hollow mercantile went dead silent when Ada Vance walked through the door still wearing yesterday's trail dust, because in 6 years nobody had ever seen the quiet hand do anything but nod, pay for her flour and cartridges, and ride back out again. She'd heard about the Crane boy the way a small town learns everything eventually, and she turned the whole matter over in her mind the entire ride in from the range, the way she turned over a hard decision about stock or weather, until it settled into something as plain and certain as a fence line. She found Elias arguing quietly with old Mr. Deering about credit he didn't have, and she set the double eagle down between them, the coin ringing once against the wood before it went still. Marry me. The store had opinions instantly. Mrs. Mai, Odette Cray, who ran the millinery and half the town's business through it, went rigid by the thread spools. Elias only stared at the coin, then at the woman who dropped it, plain-dressed, weathered, unremarkable by every measure the town had ever applied to her. I don't know you. No, Ada allowed. But your brother has 3 days, and I have the means to make that number bigger, and I need a husband more than I've let on to anyone in this town. Call it a bargain, not a courtship. He searched her face for pity or mockery and found neither. Only a level, patient waiting that reminded him oddly of the way he waited out a spooked horse. You've got 41 cents more than me. That coin says otherwise. She let the silence stand rather than explain it. He should have laughed her clean out of the store. Instead, he found himself wanting the night to think on it. Take it, Ada allowed. But know this. If you say yes, it isn't charity, and it isn't a rescue. It's a partnership, full and equal, your voice as loud as mine in whatever we build, and your brother comes with us and gets whatever care he needs the whole while he's mending. I won't have a husband who thinks he owes me for the air he breathes. Something in Elias's shoulders eased half an inch at that, the particular relief of a proud man handed away to say yes without surrendering the last of himself. And if I say no, then the doctor gets paid regardless. Ada was already turning for the door. "I didn't come in here to buy a debt off your back and hold it over you. Think on it. I'll be at the Livery Corral come morning." She was gone before anyone found their voice again. By supper, the whole of Cedar Hollow had a strong opinion, and few of them were kind. Cake cornered Elias outside the boarding house to make plain, with the relish of a woman certain of her Christian duty, that no sensible man married a drifting hand. He'd known the length of one conversation, coin or no coin. Elias listened and gave her little back. That night he sat by Daniel's bed and laid it all out plainly. Daniel, 16 and sharper than the fever, let on, went quiet a long moment. "What's she like?" "Steady," Elias allowed, because it was the truest word he had. "Looked me in the eye the whole while. Didn't flinch once." Daniel weighed that with the gravity of a much older man. "Take it. Ain't nobody looked at either one of us like we were worth a plain conversation. Since Ma and Pa died, I'll take steady over kind any day." Elias found Ada at the Livery Corral before first light, exactly where she'd promised, carrying a rangy bay gelding with the unhurried competence of someone who'd done it every morning of her life. "I'll marry you. On your terms. Partnership. My brother comes." Ada nodded once, like a woman closing a ledger already balanced in her head the night before. "Then we'd best get you and Daniel packed. There's a long ride ahead of us, and a valley, to show you before any preacher gets near either one of us." They left Cedar Hollow 2 mornings later in a hired wagon, Daniel bundled in blankets in the bed behind them, and by the second night's camp, Daniel had pronounced Ada, in the grave tone of a 16-year-old delivering a verdict he considered important, all right, which seemed to please her more than she let show. Ada drove the team herself, and Elias noticed it before almost anything else about her. The sure, easy way she read the road, steering wide of a soft patch of ground he hadn't seen coming, the quiet competence with which she checked the horse's feet each evening unasked. When he tried once to learn what she'd done before Cedar Hollow, she offered only, worked, land-managed things, and nothing further. The same closed door she'd kept shut since the mercantile. On the 3rd day the road narrowed to little more than a trail, hemmed in by timber older and denser than anything Elias had seen since Wyoming, and twice they crossed sound, well-built wooden bridges spanning fast mountain streams, far too solid for a track that was supposed to lead nowhere in particular. Elias marked the fence line visible occasionally through the trees, long and straight and strung with good wire, and marked, too, the way Ada's shoulders seemed to loosen the deeper they traveled. Not tension leaving her, but something else entirely. A woman gradually setting down a weight she'd carried a long way. Late that afternoon she drew the team up at the crest of a long ridge and turned to look at him, and something in her face stopped whatever he'd been about to say. "Before we go over, there's something I should have made plain back in Cedar Hollow, and didn't, because I needed to know you'd choose the bargain before you knew the whole of what was in it." His stomach went tight and still. "What is it?" "What I actually have." She clicked the team forward before he could ask another question. He heard it before he saw it. Cattle, a great low murmur of them settling in for evening, rich and widespread, carried up the slope along with a smell of hay and good earth and wood smoke. Then the timber broke away at the crest of the ridge, and Elias Crane stopped breathing, entirely below them, filling a valley cupped between 2 mountain ranges, like something out of a preacher's parable, lay Hidden Valley. The grass was green, in a way nothing this late in the season had any business being, which meant irrigation, which meant money. He couldn't begin to calculate. Fencing ran for miles, taut and true. 3 enormous barns stood in good repair, and beyond them a scatter of smaller buildings, a bunkhouse, a smithy, structures he had no names for, and at the center of it all, set back on a low natural rise, a house, not a cabin, not even a large farmhouse. 2 full stories of cut stone and honest timber, a porch running the whole length of the front, windows throwing back the last gold of the evening sun, like they had something to prove. "Who are you?" Elias finally managed. "The same woman who put that coin on the counter," Ada said, though even she could hear how thin that sounded against 11,000 acres of proof to the contrary. "That is not a hired hand's home, Ada. No." She set the brake, climbed down, and stood below him in the last of the light, and for the first time since the mercantile, Elias saw something in her face that wasn't calm. "My name is Ada Vance. My father built Hidden Valley over 30 years, out of nothing but a wagon and stubbornness. When he died, it passed to me, all of it. The land, the cattle, the house, the name on the deed at the county courthouse. I've owned every acre we're looking at since I was 22 years old." The wind moved through the pines. "Then why in God's name," Elias said, low and careful, "were you working fence for wages in a coat with a torn elbow?" "Because a man once let his own brother know over cards that marrying me was the cheapest 11,000 acres he'd ever find. And I decided after that I'd rather be wanted for the woman who can read weather and gentle a bad-tempered colt than for anything written on a deed. I built a plainer life so I could watch a man's whole character before he ever knew there was a fortune riding on his good behavior. I needed to know you'd say yes to me, not to this. You lied to me. I never spoke a false word. I let you believe what the coat and the wages suggested. That's still a lie, Ada. A lie of omission is a lie regardless." She took that without flinching, the way a person takes a fair verdict they've already handed down on themselves. "You're right. I'm sorry for the shape of it, even if I'm not sorry for the reason behind it." Elias looked past her at the valley, at the barns, the fencing, the herd moving below like a slow dark river, and thought of everything he'd left behind. The doctor's back room, 41 cents. A brother whose bill she'd quietly paid in full before they'd even left town. A partnership offered with her own 2 conditions attached. His brother cared for the whole while. None of that had changed because of what lay at the bottom of this ridge. Something else had, though, something that would take longer than one evening on a wagon seat to settle. "Take us down." "I haven't forgiven the shape of it, but I want to see the rest of what you haven't made plain yet." She looked at him with something that wasn't triumph, only relief, the particular relief of a person braced for the worst, and handed instead something more complicated and more hopeful than expected. As the wagon rolled down into Hidden Valley in the last gold light of evening, Daniel, 16 and nobody's fool, looked out at the whole green sweep of it and smiled the small private smile his brother didn't see. Because Daniel had known something was different about the steady woman with the coin from the moment she'd looked him dead in the eye and never once looked away. Otis Marsh met them at the barn before the wagon had fully stopped, a weathered man well past 60, with a beard cropped close and hands like carved fence posts, and when he saw Ada on the bench beside a stranger, his whole face opened into something warmer than surprise. "Boss, Otis, this is Elias Crane, the man I mean to marry, and his brother Daniel, who needs a week of Mrs. Abbott's cooking, and not much else. Mrs. Nell Abbott, the housekeeper who ran the interior of that stone house with the same iron authority Marsh ran the yard, had a room ready inside 20 minutes, and Daniel settled into it with willow bark tea and real bread before Elias had finished absorbing that 22 people worked this outfit full time. All of them in on a secret Ada had never once explained to him herself. "They knew the moment we rode in," he said. "Marsh has known me since I was 12. The rest knew I'd gone looking for something, not the particulars." She held his gaze steady. "I sent word ahead 2 days before we left that I was bringing a man home who might become my husband. I was hopeful. You'd say yes. I wasn't certain. If you'd refused, at that corral, I'd have let you walk, and I wouldn't have come after you with all this to change your mind. I've had that happen before. Someone who wanted the valley, and only later, discovered he didn't much want me. I wasn't building a second life the same way twice." That admission sat between them a long moment, and Elias understood then more clearly than her explanation at the ridge had managed exactly what the torn coat and the gold coin had actually been, not deception for its own sake. Fear. The particular fear of a woman chosen once for her acreage, who'd decided she'd rather be chosen for nothing and found worthy than chosen for everything and quietly resented for it. Over the following days she showed him the whole of it without being asked twice. The account ledgers spread across her father's old desk, the fair wages paid to every hand on the place, the quarterly payment still honored to 2 neighboring families her father had made old promises to, promises she'd kept faithfully 5 years running, though no court could have made her. Most owners would have found legal grounds to end those the day the land transferred, Elias observed, turning through the entries. They were promised. As if that settled it entirely, and something in the plainness of the answer told him more about the shape of her character than the 11,000 acres ever could. Daniel found his own place in Hidden Valley faster than either of them expected, trailing after Otis Marsh through the barns with the rapid questions of a boy who'd found a subject worth caring about, and by the end of the first week he was mending harness leather under Marsh's steady instruction. Abbott shaking her head in mock alarm. Between Ada and Elias, something quieter took root, that neither one named aloud. She taught him to read a spooked horse the way her father had taught her, patient and unhurried, and he found himself watching her hands more than the horse most mornings. He mended a torn cinch strap for her unasked and left a hot cup of coffee at her elbow before dawn, small currency exchange between 2 people who had each been burned once for the wrong reasons, and were very carefully learning to trust for the right ones instead. Neither one named it love, yet both of them pressed on the matter, would have admitted they were watching for it anyway. Trouble arrived on the 6th day, the way real trouble usually does from a direction nobody had been watching. A rider came up the south road at mid-morning in good clothes and a look Ada recognized from half a county away as a man pleased with something he hadn't yet revealed. "That's Merritt Vane," Otis Marsh said, appearing at her shoulder before the rider had dismounted. "Land agent out of Helena. Been sniffing around our south boundary 2 months now. Owns the 2 spreads east of the Gaetano place and has wanted this valley near on 10 years. What stopped him? Your father? Then you." Vane came into the yard with the easy manner of a man who intended to make himself comfortable somewhere that wasn't his, silver-templed, well-fed, his handsomeness assembled rather than earned. His eyes found Ada and did a quick recalculation before he crossed toward her with a smile that showed too many teeth. "Miss Vance," he began, then caught himself with a thin laugh. "Or soon to be Mrs. Crane, I hear. News travels fast in a small territory. I'm an old friend of this valley, Mr. Vane. I'll let my husband Toby know you're here." She found Elias in the study, and the change in him was immediate the moment she gave the name, an alertness settling over him he hadn't shown since the ridge. He went out to the yard, and Ada watched from the window as the 2 men met in the open space between house and barn, Elias's arms loose and still, Vane expansive, working his hands the way a man does when he's making an offer he expects refused, only to watch that refusal land and adjust mid-smile into something with a harder edge underneath it. Vane held out a folded paper. Elias didn't take it. Vane tucked it away, tipped his hat, and rode south. "He's filed a claim." Elias came into the study and dropped into the chair across from her. 40 acres of the south pasture, the water rights that go with it, says there's a boundary error going back to your father's original survey, and he's got a witness statement to prove it. 30 days to settle, or he files formal. Ada took the papers. He laid across the desk and read them twice, a survey commissioned 3 years back, under Vane's name, and beneath it, a statement attributed to a man named Otto Reinhold, dead these past 8 years, swearing the original Hidden Valley boundary had been measured. Reinhold, very quietly. "His widow still keeps a house in Cedar Hollow. You know her? Everyone in that town knows Agnes Reinhold. And everyone knows Otto Reinhold never put his signature to anything he hadn't gone over 3 times first. If his name is genuinely on this, I'll eat my hat. And if it isn't, Merritt Vane has built his whole case on a dead man's forged signature, and I mean to prove it in front of every clerk in the territory. They rode back to Cedar Hollow 2 days later, Ada insisting they go together, despite Elias's worry that her sudden reappearance as the valley's true owner would set the town's tongues wagging faster than any land dispute. Let them talk. I've spent 6 years letting this town believe whatever it wanted. About me, it can spend one afternoon learning the truth. Agnes Reinhold opened her door with the wariness of a woman who'd spent 8 years fielding condolences she no longer wanted, and her face ran through several things in quick succession when she recognized Ada, standing on her step in a fine wool coat instead of a Hans canvas jacket. She let them in without much comment and offered no tea. Someone's using Otto's name in a land dispute against Hidden Valley. A survey and a statement, both dated 3 years back, swearing Otto witnessed the original boundary measured wrong. Agnes went very still. A man came around about that time. Claimed to be a historian doing work on old territorial surveys for the county. Polite fellow. Otto liked him fine, showed him his old record books, spent the better part of an afternoon with him. She looked at her hands. That man wanted Otto to sign something confirming a particular recollection about your boundary line. Otto wouldn't do it. Made it plain to me that night the line was where old Vance put it, and he wasn't going to say otherwise, for any man's convenience, historian or not. He never signed it, Elias said. He never put his name to a thing, Agnes said flatly, repeating her husband's own words as she remembered them. Otto was a precise man his whole life. He would not sign a lie, and I'll stand in front of any judge in this territory and swear to it. She considered a moment longer. That fellow wanted a good many other things from him, too. When you traveled, who managed the place in your absence? I recall thinking it an odd thing for a historian to care about. Riding the long way back through Cedar Hollow's Main Street that afternoon, Ada caught sight of Ezra Combs, standing outside the land office, in close conversation with a clerk she didn't recognize, and something in the easy familiarity of it made plain who had been keeping Merritt Vane so well informed about her comings and goings. She kept that to herself for now, filing it away the way her father had taught her to file every useful fact. For the moment, it would matter most. The hearing was set for the Helena land office 3 weeks later. Merritt Vane's formal claim lay before the county recorder and Judge Whitfield. A circuit judge come through on his regular rounds, and half of Cedar Hollow made the 2-day journey to watch, curiosity having overpowered good manners entirely. Vane laid out his case with the polish of a man who'd never once expected serious opposition, setting his 3-year-old survey on the recorder's table beside the statement bearing Otto Reinhold's name, arguing in a smooth, unhurried voice that Hidden Valley's south 40 acres rightly belonged inside his own boundary, a simple correction of an old error, nothing more. Ada rose when her turn came, and the room which had spent 3 weeks whispering about the poor hand who'd turned out to own 11,000 acres went silent to hear what she'd say. She laid her father's original filing on the table first, 40 years old, properly witnessed, the language clean and unambiguous, and beside it 5 years of her own quarterly ledgers, every payment, every wage, every honored promise recorded in her own steady hand. Proof of a woman who had run that valley with more care than any land agent from Helena ever had reason to doubt. Mr. Vane's whole survey rests on one signature, Otto Reinhold's. I brought the one person alive who can speak to whether it's genuine. Agnes Reinhold rose, 200 miles from her own front porch, and gave the recorder and the judge the same account she'd given Ada in her own parlor, that her husband had met the man who commissioned that survey, that he had flatly refused to sign the statement placed before him. and that the words above his supposed signature were not words Otto Reinhold had ever spoken in her hearing. Judge Whitfield asked to see the disputed page directly, held it beside a genuine letter of Otto Reinhold's that Agnes produced from her own reticule, and even from the gallery Elias could see the recorder's eyebrows climb at the comparison, the forged signature too careful, too even. Missing entirely the small tremor age had put into Otto Reinhold's real hand these last years of his life. Merritt Vane's confidence cracked for the first time that afternoon when the judge pressed him plainly to account for how he'd come to possess a dead man's forged signature, and the answer he gave satisfied no one in that room, least of all himself. Judge Whitfield ruled from the bench within the hour. Hidden Valley's original boundary upheld in full, Vane's claim dismissed with a pointed suggestion that the territorial prosecutor might have his own questions about the survey's provenance, and Merritt Vane left the Helena land office considerably less pleased than he'd arrived. Waiting outside with the wagon, Otis Marsh confirmed what Ada had already half suspected about Ezra Combs's part in the whole scheme, information he'd quietly gathered the same 3 weeks she'd spent gathering hers, and Ada only nodded, unsurprised, filing that fact away too, though it mattered considerably less now than it once might have. There's an old line credited to Mark Twain, who spent his own restless years chasing fortune across country, every bit as rough as Montana territory. By land, he liked to say. They're not making any more of it. Ada Vance had never needed a humorist to teach her that. She had built her whole disguise around a plainer version of the same truth. That land could be bought and sold and surveyed and stolen by clever men with lawyers and forged paper, but a person's honest character could not, and that was the one thing worth marrying for. Judge Whitfield hadn't yet left the bench when Ada put a question to him, in front of the whole courtroom, about whether a circuit judge already sworn to his purpose that morning might do one more piece of business before riding on to the next county. Elias looked at her sharply, and for the first time in 3 weeks, something crossed his face that wasn't strategy or worry, something closer to hope. I asked this man to marry me. Some weeks back, in a mercantile, over a gold coin, Ada declared, loud enough for the whole room to hear it plainly, and I never did make it proper in front of a man of the law. I'd like to now, Elias Crane, if you're still willing, coin or no coin between us. Judge Whitfield, who had spent the better part of his career settling boundary disputes and livestock arguments and precious little that pleased him half so well, allowed that he could indeed marry 2 willing parties before lunch, and let out a genuine laugh of surprise, took Ada's hand across the recorder's table, and made his own willingness plain. The gavel that had ruled Hidden Valley's boundary secure came down once more that morning, softer, and pronounced Ada Vance and Elias Crane, husband and wife, in front of a courtroom full of Cedar Hollow neighbors who would talk of little else for the rest of the winter, exactly as Ada had once predicted they would. They rode back into Hidden Valley 3 days later to a gate standing open, Otis Marsh having watched the south road since dawn, and Daniel waiting in the yard with color fully returned to his face, and a grin that gave away everything his 16-year-old pride wanted to hide. He looked at his brother's hand wrapped around Ada's and asked nothing further, because nothing further needed asking. Mrs. Inting Abbott had a supper laid out that would have fed twice their number, and Otis Marsh shook Elias's hand with the particular gravity of a man passing along his own quiet approval, and the whole valley, cattle and timber and stone and every acre of it, settled around them that evening the way it always had. Unbothered by lawyers or forged paper or anything the territory had tried to put against it. Ada Vance had built 2 lives to find one honest man, and Elias Crane had walked into a mercantile with 41 cents and walked out in the end, richer than either of them had ever expected to be, not because of 11,000 acres of grass and timber, but because he had been chosen, plainly and completely, for exactly who he was, and that is the whole of it. The poor cowgirl, who wasn't poor at all, the proud man who learned there's no shame in being loved for nothing but himself, and the valley that waited quietly behind its gate the whole time, ready for two people who had each spent too long making themselves small, to finally build something large enough for both of them. If a story like this one warmed you the way a hearth does on a cold Montana night, you know where to find the next one. Come on back and ride along with us again soon, right here where we keep the Cowgirl Chronicles going, one honest story at a time.